Recent studies, in fact, show that 1 in 4 girls is sexually abused before they're 18.
We've heard about it on the national level and in movies, but most of us are completely unaware that human trafficking is happening right in our own backyards.
I'm here to just introduce Margaret Nacke and also her companion Mary Savoy. They are both Sisters of St. Joseph of Concordia, Kansas. They're mainly involved in the research and also in fighting against trafficking. But as I understand it, Margaret and Mary were the ones that began the program. But they still do very much with it. They've traveled intensively throughout many, many countries, and sometimes dealing with other issues, mainly working in Eastern European countries for the formation of sisters who have been behind the Iron Curtain. And they put together that movie, Interrupted Lives, which was concerned with sisters in our own Notre Dames also, who survived communism. They were behind the Iron Curtain. Recently, they completed a study of 100 students at the college nearby, the Cloud County Community College, and on the subject of trafficking in that, and organized a summit for teachers, educators, domestic violence staff, students, faculty, etc. And they had that summit on Wednesday. So here they are fresh from that summit also. So I will turn it over to Margaret, and she'll fill you in on many of the things. And you know, we have in our history the quotation from Mother Teresa, trust and dare. Well, these are two women who have trusted and dared many, many things and are still doing it. Okay, Margaret, it's all yours.
You know, I want to tell you, sisters, I feel very close to the SSNDs. I think my community thinks that half of me is SSND because I had you for 8 years, and I really admire you. I admire your teaching. Mary and I have stayed with your sisters in Hungary and in Poland and other areas, so I really appreciate you and all you do and have a very soft heart for you. What I'd like to do now is to give you a background of human trafficking. If you think that slavery has been abolished years ago, I think you need to push the rethink button, because human trafficking is slavery. And there's large amounts of money, billions of dollars, made on the backs of men, women, and children today who are enslaved. It's immoral, it's unjust, and it's one of the great social issues of our time. We don't know really how many slaves there are. The number I have read, the number I hear is 27 million. However, I want to say to you that it's really impossible to get exact statistics on the business of trafficking, whether you're talking about victims or pimps or buyers or whatever. It's difficult, but what we know are two things: that there are millions of people being trafficked today, and of those millions, children are part of the millions. And secondly, countries who prosecute traffickers, including our own, the prosecutions don't even come near the case of the victims, don't even come near it. But I think what statistics do for me is to give me an idea of the problem that it is, so the gargantuan problem that slavery is in our world today. The technology, the internet, globalization really has extended the reach of the traffickers and the predators exponentially. We have turned people into products. It's the great commodification, I think, of people. men, women, children can be bought as products on the internet. And you might say, well, how? Well, there are a number of sites on the internet, and I'm sure many sites that I sure don't know, and I've never clicked onto them. But you have Backpage is one of them, Mocospace, city sites, all kinds of sites where you can get on the internet and buy men, women, or children. And I think one of the things to remember, especially for children, if children have easy access to the internet, which they do, and are unsupervised, they become prey to traffickers and to predators. And there are hundreds of predators online at any given time. So I think that's something to me that alerts us to we need to get to junior high kids. If the average age of a girl getting into the sex trade is 13 years old and they're getting a lot younger, then I think we really need to get to that age of persons. And you'll notice that I'm going to talk a lot about women, and that doesn't mean that boys are not also praised. They are. But for sex trafficking, for example, over 80% are women and girls. Trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar business. The other two, it's one of three, the other two are drugs and arms. And these are fueled by greed and demand. Doesn't make any difference what we do to the mind, body, or spirit of an individual, as long as money is to be made. And then the demand factor, the buyer, that's really the root of the problem. The drug cartels are really big into not only drugs, but into trafficking, because trafficking is very lucrative, because you can buy a woman over and over again in a day. It's not just one drug deal, but you can buy a woman over and over again in the trade, or a boy or man or whatever it is. The criminal cartels, crime syndicates, if you will, are into all three of these. What is trafficking? Trafficking is taking a person by force, fraud, or coercion and exploiting them for sex or labor. Trafficking is taking a person by force, fraud, or coercion and exploiting them for sex or labor. So we have sex. Where do you find the sex trafficking the most? You find it in bars, brothels, massage parlors, on the street corners where you can buy girls, even domestic, where domestic runs into the labor category, but it also can be also the sex trafficking, because a person can be hired for the domestic during the day and then at night be a sex slave. And when you think of a big thing right now are younger girls, and pimps want younger and younger people, and they want fresh, not so much that, they might have a person that they send out all the time, a pimp, but it's the buyer who wants fresh people all the time. So you keep going into keep new people coming on the scene.
I want to bring in Asia Graves. She's a survivor of human trafficking and now works as an advocate for victims. Asia, thanks so much for being here. Do you think these arrests will do anything to slow down the problem of sexual exploitation and human trafficking in this country?
Actually, no. I don't think it's making a dent. But you have to go after the Johns who are buying the sex, because the demand side, like you mentioned the Super Bowl, more girls are going to be sold at the Super Bowl than probably tickets, which is amazing because you think about each girl that's sold.
Labor trafficking is another. Maybe some of you read about the Myanmar young boys who were on a Thai fishing vessel, and how they ever escaped, I don't know, but they were discovered and brought to safety, and they were practically beaten to death. So fisheries are one big labor trafficking business. Door-to-door salespersons are also into labor trafficking. Agriculture, construction, all kinds of ways that people make money in labor through trafficking the people there. Another thing is the forced marriages. And a couple weeks ago, I was in a university town, and in the audience was a prosecuting attorney. And he was telling me that he was working, I wouldn't say working with a person because he said I can't do anything about it, but one of the college students there was married to a 10-year-old girl. That girl had already been into the hospital 3 times. But he said, we can't do it, this is Kansas, he said, we can't do a thing about that because it was a civic, the marriage was okay in the country from which they came. And he said, the only thing that we can do is, in Kansas, you have to be in school until you're 16 years of age. And he said, I'm hoping that she learns enough to realize that she's in a bad situation. But he said, our hands are tied. He said, the Attorney General knows about it and everything, but he said that we cannot do a thing for this little girl. What I'd like to do is pull apart the trafficking business, the components, what I call the components of trafficking. Victims, and I separate the trafficker and the pimp, although they could be the same person. So I usually say victims, traffickers, pimps, buyers, and then the bystanders. We're the bystanders. We're the bystanders. Who are the victims? The people most vulnerable really are people from very poor countries, because they can be coerced into what a trafficker tells them that they're going to have. And we're seeing the greatest migration, we keep saying, since the Second World War. That's a great opportunity for traffickers to prey upon parents to give them their children for a better life. So groups like that, or if there's a earthquake or something, wherever there's violence in an area, like Haiti a couple years ago, a great opportunity for traffickers to move in. As far as individuals, you have people with maybe a low self-image who come from broken homes that have, there's no parenting or little parenting, drugs, the drug scene. It can be, and you've seen them as teachers, you've seen children in school who they're just kind of loners, or they need extra help, and those are the ones that are most vulnerable to being trafficked. And who's the trafficker? The trafficker really can be, we have what we call familial trafficking. Their people could be, and these are true situations, the grandmother who sold her granddaughter in order to pay the rent, or the mother who sold her 7-year-old daughter to a man who liked little girls, or a dad who sold his daughter to his men friends. This was out in California. So it can really be anyone. It can be an uncle, an aunt, a sibling, a friend. We had a K-State student, Kansas State University student, who freshman year, first 2 weeks she was on campus, was trafficked by a senior at the college. would you like to go to a party and meet some people? And to me, the trafficker is a salesperson who sells a dream to someone that becomes a nightmare. You know, and once they're in it, and you can see how easy it is, folks, because if you don't have a job, and I don't care if you're from if you're educated or not, but especially if you're very poor, if you don't have a job and I come to you and say, I can get you a really good job where you can make money. If you're from another country, you can send money home to your folks and so on. It's easy to be taken in by that. And then we have the pimps. We have what we call guerrilla pimps, who are just violent with those that they control. But the pimps, again, start out with loving, I love you, buy the person maybe clothing, nice clothing, and take them out to eat, and are just very lovely. But then they switch the switch. Once they get the person involved, they switch on to becoming, I'm going to tell you what to wear, what to do, how much money you have to bring in every night, and they become a different person. And what they control a number of girls, and the number of girls that they, maybe you've heard this, a number of girls that they control are called their stable. Just like we have animals, for horses for our stable. And also what law enforcement is finding more and more, where they're tattooed. Like one pimp, for example, tattooed his initials on the eyelid of a girl. You think how painful that would be. Another pimp tattooed his manifesto on the back of a girl. So the tattoo would be like we in our part of the country brand cattle, so that you can identify ownership. They're doing that more and more. And the latest that I've read about 2 weeks ago, you know, our hospitals, of course, many survivors or victims come into our hospital emergency rooms. And one of the doctors said that he had been working with psychiatric patients, I guess, during the day, and this girl came in and said she had a tracker. And he thought, well, she seems mentally okay, she's lucid and so on, and he found out indeed she had a tracker. It was a little micro chip of affair where the pimp could keep track of her, just like we would put that maybe in an animal, so that we could keep track of the animal. So pimps make just millions and millions of dollars, and ex-pimps, you know, there's been a study, I think, in Chicago of ex-pimps and the life they led. Many of them have been sexually abused themselves or abused in their own home themselves. And then we have the buyers. Who are the buyers? The buyers are people with money. So that when people say to me, does it happen in this country? You mean here it happens, in the middle part of the country? And I said, listen, they're the buyers. We're the people with the money who can buy the products throughout the world. You can buy a person just like you can buy a book on Amazon. I mean, it's easy if you have the money and the credit card and so on. But the buyers could be your doctor, your attorney, a teacher of the children. It could be anyone. And there again, I have only read one study, and I'm sure there are many more, of who the buyers are. Church-going, family men. And it kind of harkens back to the 18th and 19th century slavery. The slave owners were prominent in the community, and they made their money on the backs of the slaves. And today, the buyers aren't making their money on them, they're spending their money that they made on them. But they might be prominent people in the community. So what I would, and then there are the bystanders, that's us. It's hard to drink a cup of coffee or hot chocolate without slavery being involved in that. And I was reading the other day the statement by a Nobel Peace Prize person, and he was saying, who are the children of those who stitch the footballs but never play the game? Or whose children are they who harvest the cocoa but never taste the chocolate? And I think that what we use, the clothes I wear, the clothes you're wearing, the food that we eat, even the equipment that we buy, from where does it come? What do we know about the transparency of the route that it comes? You know, standing at Walmart, I was looking at children's clothing, you know, made in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and of course we have a lot from China. But what our government's looking at, and I think what some of us sisters are looking at, are trying to get to the transparency of the slavery that's involved in that. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But I think it's something that we can remember that, you know, it's who's suffering because of our comfort is really kind of what it amounts to. So what I would like to do is to show this DVD of 3 young women from Iowa who have been trafficked, and it kind of gives you an idea of their family backgrounds and then how they got into the trafficking situation.
When I was 7, my biological dad passed away, and my mom started dating another guy. He was like a nice guy at first, and then he became very abusive to my sister and I.
Growing up, I was raised in a single-parent household in a loving home and was surrounded by friends and family. I moved around a lot, really pretty much just stuck to myself.
As a young child, I had a really good life. I was very involved with church. I was a good student. I had a lot of friends. I guess the only bad thing is when I was 6 years old, my parents got divorced.
When I was like 10 or 11, I ran away from my mom's house, got into trouble. I ran away from there with another girl. We went to her parents' house in Cedar Rapids, and her dad wasn't very nice either. He tried making us do things so he could get drugs and stuff from other people, and I left there. I think I was just walking down one of the aisles, and then a guy approached me, and I said, well, I'm just looking for some food to get, and he said, do you have any money to get it? And I said no. He asked me if I wanted a modeling job, and he told me that I'd have all this money and that I could have food and shower and all this stuff, and then I went with him. He had some people from Chicago come, and another girl came. He told me that I was going to go with them, and when I refused to go with them, they took my pants off and beat me with a belt. And then they put me in their van and took me to Chicago.
When I was 13, my mom met my stepdad. That was a big change for me, and my mom was always working. My dad would come home, and he was just very controlling and an alcoholic and verbally abusive. I believed that I wasn't worth anything, and I was just better left out of the picture. I went to high school. I got involved with the wrong crowd. The ones that were doing the drugs, and their parents did drugs, and got involved with sneaking out. After graduating high school, I was introduced to coke for the first time. I walked out of the room and said that I didn't need that I didn't want that. I still just kept drinking with them, and as the night went on and it was presented to me, I eventually gave in. My mom had kicked me out several times, and I actually ended up staying in my car for a week. My drug addiction became worse, and the alcohol, I was not just going out on the weekends, but now it was every day of the week. My life was out of control, and I didn't see it myself, but everyone around me had told me to get help. At the time, I had friends that were strippers, and to me looked glamorous. They made it look like they were making a bunch of money, and men wanted to be with them, and I knew that was something that I wanted to do. I worked with the stripping not very long until I actually found that there was an escorting business that was here locally in the Quad Cities that I could get a hold of.
When I was 14 years old, I started smoking marijuana here and there and just experimenting with that. When I was 16, I was at a party, and there's a lot of drugs and alcohol there. I had drank a lot. The next thing I remember is waking up in a park, and my pants were off, and I was left just laying in the park. After that, I didn't really know how to feel, how to act, what to do. I didn't know who to talk to about it. But all I did was just block people out. I didn't let anyone in. Later that year, I started dating a boy from school. He was a marijuana dealer, and quickly after began selling cocaine. And that's when everything really spiraled out of control. I quit going to school. I moved out of my house. I was just on cocaine every day, all day. Our relationship became very abusive, physically, emotionally. Shortly after breaking up with him, my mom stepped in and she finally committed me to rehab. I was 18 then. While I was in rehab, I met a girl there. So when we got out of rehab, I moved in with her, and I didn't think my life could get any worse. And I went from cocaine to crack cocaine. I had met another man. For a while there, we were just going to Chicago and Rockford and picking drugs up and bringing them back. After a couple times of doing that, we were in Chicago, and basically he said, this time to get them, you have to prostitute yourself, and this is what's gonna happen. We're gonna go to a hotel, and this is what you're gonna do.
They took me to their van and took me to Chicago with that other girl, and left us at a house that was really old and it looked run down, and there were people standing outside with guns. And he left me there with a guy, the pimp. He came into the room and he took pictures of me and posted them on Craigslist. And he gave me a cell phone that I had to answer when someone called. There were people outside my door watching my room. And I had to do stuff like sexual things with guys whenever they would come, and then give the money to the guy outside my room. There was a girl who tried running away, and then he brought us all into the same room and told us all that if we did what she would tried to do, then we were gonna get beat like she did, and he beat her in front of us.
Working for the escorting business, I knew I'd make a lot more money and it'd be easier. She also had told me that I'd be going by another name, and this would be a nickname that nobody else knew me by. I also was told to slip the money under the door. She had someone that would take the money from me. I remember after a week, I had wanted to quit and I wanted to get out, but because I was renting from her, I didn't feel that there was any way that I was going to be able to get out of this. I would meet clients at hotels and their house and sometimes truck stops. Because of the drugs and alcohol, I was so numb, but at the same time, I was always afraid, and I felt like I was living two different lives, two different identities. I did this for over a year and dealt with feelings of shame and guilt and depression and wanting to get out. I didn't want my family to know about it. It wasn't until I had got my second DUI, I needed a ride home and got a ride from a guy across the street. He took me to a drug house where I was raped by multiple men.
I had met another man, and he took me to Memphis, Tennessee. And when we got there, I quickly realized what was going to happen again. I feel like it was more the drugs than anything holding me there. But it was also him, because he knew that he had that power over me. And if I didn't work that day and I didn't go out and prostitute myself, I couldn't have any. I was just taken advantage of every day, and I was raped constantly. I was beaten. I was stole from. I was just stripped of everything physically and emotionally. I remember walking down the street one day and a cop pulled over, and you could obviously tell by looking at me, I'm not okay. There's something going on. And he just said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Because I was just so scared. I didn't want to go back to a police station. I just remember after he pulled away, I was just like, I just wanted him so badly to come back, and I couldn't change that, and a part of me wanted to just go back so bad, but where was I gonna go? Who was I gonna call? And who was gonna come get me? Because who really cared?
There was a day that I got a call on the phone about someone who wanted to come, and the guy that came into the room pretended that he was going to do all those same things that every other person did, but he ended up being an undercover police officer, and he arrested me and took me to the Cook County Police Department, and he questioned me. But I was only 14 going on 15, and I told him how old I was. He knew that I ran away because I told him I did, because I wanted to go back home.
I decided that I couldn't do it anymore. One of the police officers told me that I needed to get help, otherwise they were going to see me dead in a ditch, like they've seen many times with other girls.
So I was stuck in a little jail in Arkansas. That was my bottom. That was when I just realized, like, I cannot live like this anymore. I felt like I was slowly dying. I called my mom, and she said, she'd be there to get me. And I've been clean since October 2009, and that was it. I just never looked back.
I don't want what happened to me to happen to anybody else. Anybody could pick you up, and it all happens really quickly. And I think a lot of the people that do the human trafficking stuff have less of a chance of getting caught in a smaller community is what they're thinking.
It's really important who you surround yourself with now, and I never reached out to any of my mentors or teachers or even family because I felt like they couldn't relate or they didn't know what they were talking about. And I think many times that these people are truly in your life and they do care, and if it's someone that you trust, it's really important to talk to someone because you don't have to make those bad decisions or go down that road.
My mom is a wonderful lady. When I got home, it was just open arms and love, and there was really no reconciling to do. When you hit those teen years, no one likes their parents. They're all crazy, they're old, they don't understand, but your parent is gonna be your best friend, and they're the ones who are gonna be there for you forever, and it's just so important to not follow in your friends and what they do and do what you think's right. And if I could go back, there's so many things. I would never have smoked that first joint, and I would never have popped that first pill because that is what took me to this life. It could happen to anyone. I mean, you hear all these crazy stories, but that's never gonna be you. and it could be.
There's a couple things that I just thought of now, and it's runaways. Within 48 hours of a runaway being on the street, a third of them are already trafficked. Another thing I wanted to mention is movement. Traffickers, pimps, keep women on the move all the time. But the law enforcement, state patrol, they must be trained in the recognition of a trafficking situation. Like we had an instance where a patrolman way out in western Kansas stopped a fellow for speeding, and by the way, there was a 14-year-old girl in the car that he was transporting from Missouri to Colorado. So I think it's the recognition of the situation, even for all of us. And I think another thing they mentioned there were escort services. We had a situation where a young girl, mother worked outside the home. She came home, didn't have anything to do, so she got in a chat room and was chatting with someone. She had no clue who was on the other end of that chat. And one day the person said, "Would you like to go for a ride in the park?" Sure, she didn't have anything else to do. Well, within 48 hours, she was in another city being sold for sex. So it's these situations that you need to be very much aware of. And I think the brain development of a younger child is really no match for an adult who's trafficking them. It's easy to convince them of some things. And you saw the toll-free number on there. That's our number in Washington, D.C., 888-3737-888. That is available to anyone 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. If you suspect something, or I remember calling them because early on when I was giving talks, someone said, "Well, what if you find someone here? What can they do in Belleville, Kansas?" And so I asked the woman, and she said, "Well, we're in touch with law enforcement, again, why they should be educated all over the country so that we can immediately, contact law enforcement." There's also a big group, Truckers Against Trafficking, because truck stops are key places where pimps can make a lot of money.
While living on the rig, she got an up-close look at the prostitution ring within the trucking world.
And the truck is nose faced in. That's a sign that a lizard is welcome.
A truck lizard is a prostitute, and many are women, some as young as 12.
The victims are taken there on a regular basis, rotated, and then they're there for the truck drivers that want them.
I heard a retired truck driver saying that when he was still on the road that a 13 or 14-year-old girl approached him and wanted to know if he'd have sex, and he said, "I didn't do anything about that," and he said, "My conscience bothered me all the time." So he said, when I retired, I decided to try and get into the trafficking schools to educate men who are on the road, because after all, the truckers are the eyes and ears of the roadway. There are a lot of groups, organizations, faith-based groups who are doing something to combat human trafficking. And so I want to tell you about U.S. Catholic Sisters and kind of how that came about. Probably in 2011, I started thinking about having a database. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a database of resources for sisters across the country who are working in trafficking so that we can use one another's resources. You can add to it, you can take from it or whatever. And so I called LCWR and they gave me Ann Schultz. And Ann got on the line and I told Ann, I said, this is what I kind of would like to do. And she said, that was in December, I think about 2011. And she said, let me talk to the group who are going to meet in January. So she talked to them about it, and as a result, they gave me the green light. And so Ann really did a lot in working with me to get a letter out to all the people on her justice slate that she sent it out to all the sisters. And what I wanted to do was to set up this database so that we could all network. We could strengthen networking among those of us working in human trafficking. Then I began to hear from all these sisters, we want to get on board with this. And I thought, oh, I really have to do something about, get some particulars here. So I kind of designed it like, what are they doing in corporate advocacy, in webinars, in prayers, conferences and workshops, research, educational materials. So I got all this information and I put it on a site called the BakitaInitiative.com. I've since changed that to reflect what sisters are doing globally, continent by continent. So you can flick on Oceania and get what sisters are doing in New Zealand or South America or wherever. And anyway, that's where it all started. And then I had a coalition. I wanted to get coalitions where sisters were meaningfully involved. And so I mapped that. And the president of FATICA, Foundations and Donors Interested in Catholic Activities, saw that. And she got a donor that funded a dozen of us, and Ann and I called a dozen people who were dozen sisters from the country, and that was our first meeting in Washington, D.C. And that turned into U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. And as of maybe 2 months ago, we're now a 501c3, and I'll give you the website, but it's sistersagainsttrafficking.org. So what is U.S. Catholic Sisters? U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Trafficking is a network of sisters who focus on combating human trafficking through legislation, education, and survivor services. And we had an ad in U.S. Airways in their in-flight December magazine of 2013. I have a little girl, maybe some of you have seen that little girl. She's been on the sides of buses. Most recently saw her, the sisters in North Dakota used her for a big billboard. We call her Precious. She was done by a firm, pro bono, in Omaha that I knew. And anyway, that's kind of where it's also been on American Airlines and U.S. Airways again in 2014. I think we had an ad in there again. But what it's done is strengthen our networking, not only in this country, but I think abroad also, that we can connect to the sisters in Australia and Renate in Europe and all over. So what I want to do is just, and I know by doing this, I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg of what sisters are doing. Sisters are doing just great work in this country on trafficking. And I want to start with UN Anima. It's an NGO of United Nations. It's a coalition of 20 congregations who advocate for women and children throughout the world. And one of their, the foci, of course, is human trafficking, and its demand. So they're doing great work at the UN. Then the sisters in Wisconsin last year created a packet for every parish in every diocese in the state of Wisconsin with a cover letter signed by all the bishops. And this is a wonderful packet of materials that has DVDs in it. It has a whole conference on there. And what I like about it, they have 3 sheets there, and those sheets are labor trafficking in Wisconsin specifically and in the country. And then they have sex trafficking in Wisconsin and in the country, and then just generally trafficking. But I was thinking that this was LCWR Region 9 in Wisconsin. And of course, they've had billboards in some of their counties in Wisconsin. But I was thinking if every state had that, you would get an idea of what's going on in your state. Then there are sisters in Ohio. In Ohio, they've done lots of workshops and conferences, and there are a number of congregations of sisters and their lay partners who are in a coalition. They do research also in Wisconsin. So they've been going for quite a long time. I think they have education centers where people can go and get more information on human trafficking. The sisters in Omaha, Nebraska, there are 3 major congregations there, and they have a coalition that on that coalition are not only sisters but also attorneys, and the attorneys on that coalition monitor the legislation in the state of Nebraska. And these sisters, they have made it one of their strong goals to go out to hotel and motel managers in the city of Omaha and a 60-mile radius, and then to follow up to see what happened in 6 months. So that's kind of I'm kind of giving you the big thing of what sisters are doing. And of course, the sisters in North Dakota, you know, they have a big problem with that oil boom up there and men's houses, and they're shipping women up there, kind of like the days of, we talked about the comfort girls and the Japanese soldiers during World War II. That's what's happening in North Dakota. But they recently had a big billboard with the little girl, the U.S. Catholic Sisters girl on there, Precious. The sisters in Wichita, Kansas, Sisters of St. Joseph, have the Via Christi health system. And they're doing a lot. They have a protocol for every one of their employees. And they most recently, past month, I would say, have completed a pediatric protocol. So when people come in, every person, the translators, the person at the desk, the nurses, the doctors, all have some background on the recognition of the survivors and the victims coming in there. And I want to say that I'm really proud of Catholic Health Association, Catholic Health Initiative, Dignity, all the conglomerates, the health conglomerates, because I think they're really trying to educate their personnel to help the people coming into them. Then the sisters out in Washington State, overseen by Holy Name Sister, they have conferences with thousands of women. They give empowerment workshops for women. But one of the things they're doing, they developed a webinar for junior high school kids, and it includes Catholic social teaching. And this is available to anyone who wants it. But I thought that's really good, because Catholic social teaching is so integral to why we're in this at all. It's the dignity of the person that we're concerned about. And then California, sisters are in all kinds of coalitions in California. And during the, maybe some of your sisters went to the big religious ed conference out in California. She had an exhibit of the Stations of the Cross, only the content was survivor stories and survivor pictures. So she made that the Stations of the Cross and the crucifixion of Christ and so on.
The Religious Education Congress dedicates a space called Sacred Space to inspire creative meditation and worship. It includes a chapel, reconciliation services, and a labyrinth that allows the replenishing of the spirit through walking meditation, journey toward the center, and stand in the spot of illumination. Lastly, it's also a space for music and art, and this year, special attention is placed on Garden of Dreams, which is a reflection of powerful images of courage from survivors of human trafficking. And we have this beautiful door that is the entrance to the Garden of Eden, which is analogous to what victims of human trafficking experience. They're lured into this life, into these experiences with the promise of wealth and riches, and then they realize that what lies ahead is debasement and a demeaning of their human dignity and quality of life.
I thought that was very creative and a very good thing to do. How does Christ suffer today in our society? So I think one of our greatest spokespersons really is Pope Francis. Pope Francis uses every opportunity to talk about human trafficking and injustices to the human being and so on. And he was giving a talk when he gave some talks in Mexico City, he said, I ask you once again to be on the line, on the firing line, really. He didn't use the word firing line. And I thought, you know, we sisters have been up front on lines in many different ways in our lifetimes. And so I just want to thank you for all that you've done and your interest in this really important work of human trafficking. So God bless you and God bless us. Thanks.